Moving right along from that flaming LGN train wreck, we're straight to our third game, Sin and Punishment, which was nominated by at Gourd Captain and at Solus Cirrus. Sin and Punishment was developed by Treasure, and it was published pretty late in the N64's lifespan on November 21st, 2000.
I'd like to say
Exclusively in Japan.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. Exclusively in Japan.
In Japan until it was released on the Wii Virtual Console in North America and Europe. And it was didn't really need to be localized because it was already in English, I might add.
But yeah, that's
always a strange decision. I always wonder why Japanese games do that sometimes.
It's because Treasure is very much a fan of old arcade games, and arcade games are traditionally in English, even if they're Japanese only. And that's just the style of things.
Localization too.
Yeah, that's just the style. It's just
you don't want to have to redo an entire translation of an arcade game just because you got like 6 lines of dialogue and they're all in Japanese. So it makes sense when most of them will speak enough English to sort of pick up what the characters are saying.
Yeah,
I might add it has one of the most incomprehensible stories of any game ever made.
You are not kidding.
More incomprehensible than Alien Soldier? That's a tall order.
It's even more incomprehensible than that. It's like a Funhouse mirror version of Evangelion that makes even less sense.
I was going to say, this is going to give frickin' End of Evangelion a run for Hideaki Anno's money. I could... okay, basically, I think
it is a parody of Evangelion.
Yes.
I honestly do think that.
That's a good point. It could...
Is it definitely? I mean, a lot of Treasure's games are kind of plot wank. That's the only way to describe it, really. Is like so many of their games are just garbage.
Yeah, the plot
plots.
is cruft in every single Treasure game. I think maybe
Treasure games are pretty much just conceived as mechanics first. I will outright say that they come up with the mechanics way ahead of anything else, any concepts, and then they kind of form everything around it. Their music is great, but their stories are never good, and I'm a huge Treasure fan. Well, the only one that makes any sense is Gunstar Heroes, and even that's disjointed.
Yeah, and even it ends on a cliffhanger, all things considered.
To anybody who's ever played Star Fox or Star Fox 64, it's very close to Star Fox 64, or Panzer Dragoon. Like the action Panzer Dragoon games. It's an on-rails 3D polygonal game that involves shooting things in front of you. Basically a descendant of games like, Operation Wolf and things like that, but you can actually move your character.
I believe Wikipedia addresses them as Cabal-likes or Cabal clones.
It's similar to Cabal. Or NAM 78 or
Wild Guns or a whole bunch of fun little games that are like that. This game does a little bit different, I think, in that it kind of, I think it's Panzer Dragoon or whatever, that it kind of mirrors in that you don't always see, unlike Star Fox, sometimes the camera moves around and sort of aims you in different directions rather than strictly being behind you the whole time, which is, it adds a nice cinematic touch to the game. It's definitely one of the more visually interesting cinematic experiences. I would put it alongside, if you want to compare it to a PlayStation game, Omega Boost. Like they have a sort of, they have like a big focus on sort of an arcade cinematic experience rather than just being a pure action game that you are in control of. You kind of just play the game in order to keep the game rolling. You just got to keep shooting enemies and hitting them with your sword. This game does make you dodge. Some of those games don't let you dodge. This game does.
Yeah, this game is actually very much into its mechanics, like most other great Treasure games. It fits right in there, and I might add that it's one of the very few 3D Treasure games that's actually any good.
What, you didn't like Stretch Panic?
No.
No one did. I'm just being a dingus.
I mean, I own it, and I mean, I'll play it because I'm a huge Treasure nerd, but none of their 3D games really live up to much. And
you're right.
These two, this and its sequel, are great games. It's very much an engine set piece game, let's just put it that way. But anyway, Sin and Punishment First of all, I want to say it's a very much a crime that this game was not released in the U.S. officially on its original hardware. The game really does use the N64's controller to its fullest. Playing it on anything else is a little difficult, but it can be managed. Actually, with the virtual console settings, I might add that if you change the settings to Type 3 or Type C, I forget which one it is, but it works really well with the classic controller. And it plays very much like a modern game. But what's cool about it is that you have melee attacks, very similar to like Wild Guns or something like that, where you can bounce back attacks and also attack enemies with your like saber. It's a very good game. It's a lot of fun to get combos on, try to get better scores with it. It's very much a descendant of arcade games, and it's a lot of fun. I really like it a lot, but it is a hardcore fans kind of game. Again, treasure games always are kind of like that, but it's a great game that is of that ilk.
Yeah, it definitely has its own style to it. I mean, you can probably tell that it is a treasure game if you're familiar with their other works. Gunstar Heroes, Dynamite Headdy, Alien Soldier, Mischief Makers, all of which are big favorites of mine. And but it, like you said, I cannot wrap my skull about what this game's supposed to be. All I can say is that it starts off with two resistance fighters, Saki and Iron, guarding some magical girl, Achi, for some reason, and then it ends with you fighting an evil duplicate of the planet Earth. What the fuck?
And I might add that this is the very first game that I know of that was kind of had like a Family Guy like revival. You know how like Adult Swim, because of reruns, brought back several shows, including Family Guy and Futurama. Well, this is kind of had a similar thing. The original Sin and Punishment went to the Virtual Console and was hugely popular when the Wii released it in North America. It sold a lot of digital copies, so because of that, the sequel was made, and the sequel's even better, if you ask me.
I'm going to actually agree with you. Just a little quick sidebar. I think the controls are more on point. It's a longer and meatier game with even more impressive set pieces and bosses. And yeah, I'll agree. It's probably the only treasure sequel that's actually worth a damn.
Well, Bangai-O Missile Fury's really good. The third Bangai-O game for 360 is actually a great game.
I can't remember if I've ever
really
played
like
that.
It's really good, but that was pretty much the last game they released in the U.S.
That's fair.
But if you don't count re-releases of Ikaruga and Guardian Heroes. But this game, first of all, it was a shame that it was never released on Western shores, but it's also one of the very few games worth importing. A bear cart will cost you around $30, which isn't bad at all.
Wow.
That's not bad.
That's a steal.
I didn't think it was bad. I didn't think it was super expensive. It's not one of the super expensive collectible games for the system. Even a full box copy will only net you $55 for a buy.
I'm going to assume that this game is actually not that popular in Japan then, because
Treasure seems to have more fans in the US, believe it or not,
which makes the fact that they didn't manage to get this one out in the US. It is definitely a surprise. This game definitely would have appealed more to the US. So the fact that they kind of dropped the ball on that one.
I want to say that we just didn't get it because it is like Twilight system death slot, basically. Unless it was like a game that Nintendo made themselves. Anything that's released at the end of a console's lifespan is definitely not going to be seen. They were already pushing for the GameCube around this time.
I definitely remember that. I was picking Conker's Bad Fur Day off discount shelves for $20 a pop, so...
I think for ridiculous money now too.
Yeah, go have a look at how much a copy of Conker's Bad Fur Day costs, and then
it's like $100. Yeah,
I think the Xbox versions being absolutely terrible definitely helped in that respect.
I don't think the Xbox version is actually the Xbox version's actually not that terrible, if you ask me. I think that it looks beautiful. First of all,
in terms of Conker's Bad Fur Day, I would definitely go with the Xbox version if I had to pick one. It's cheaper. to begin with.
Yeah,
and
so there's that.
And you can get it on Rare Replay, the original version on Rare Replay.
It also runs a lot better. The N64 version really pushes the N64 too hard, which I don't know if Sin and Punishment does that. I think it runs pretty smooth in general. It's
it's smooth. It's smooth.
Which is good because it looks good too. They definitely really focused on keeping like the poly count and everything nice and even so that the game runs quite well, which is a little surprising since a lot of late release N64 games chugged the system. And you remember Perfect Dark Vista or Villa level? Boy, that was a lot of fun at 1 frame per second.
I love quite a few games for the N64, but I think it's Vice's most hated system ever. I forget exactly.
So let me explain that. It's my most hated piece of hardware, but I love a lot of the software on it. Like some of my favorite games of all time are on that system. Ocarina of Time is undeniable. I love Mischief Makers. I love Sin and Punishment. I love a lot of games for the system. In fact, my favorite Bomberman games are on the system.
Oh, I love the first Bomberman N64 a lot.
F-Zero is a fantastic game on N64. Yeah, N64 has some great titles and some really great output, but the hardware is complete garbage.
I have to agree. It's so much fun.
So is the controller, for that matter.
Oh, Jesus Christ, you're not kidding. I wanted to say, back to Sin and Punishment, the controls are kind of tricky for a game like this. At least I think so. I think you might have already said, but if you don't map it out exactly, you're going to be stumbling around, confusing the cursor with your movement.
And I might add that this, like a lot of other N64 games, is actually best played on this system just because of the way that the controller works. But it is serviceable. It is actually really good with the classic controller if you put it on Type C controller mode. And this is also one of the few N64 games that's on the Wii U Virtual Console, by the way.
So yes, we should definitely say, if you are going to play it, Wii U version, definitely.
Yeah, the Wii U version is cleaned up. It has a smoother frame rate. Just like all N64 games, it looks a lot better through emulation than it does on the actual system. Nintendo's official emulators make it look really great. I recommend, if you have to play any games that were re-released, there's only a few at this point that have not been re-released that are still worth playing on the N64. Mischief Makers is the big one that hasn't been had a re-release in any respect. But like all the Rare games have been released on Virtual Console or the Xbox One at this point, but it's almost always better to play them on those systems. It's just that this particular game, it very much uses the controller in a way that only the N64 makes sense with.
I feel the same is true of Star Fox 64 feels a bit weird on anything except the N64 controller. That's another one of those games that kind of suits the controller. So, did anyone else have much to say about Sin and Punishment itself before we try and put this somewhere?
The game's got a lot of bosses in it.
Yeah, and the bosses,
it's a treasure game.
Like any treasure game, are great. They're a lot of fun, and a lot of times they're even comedic. They're fun. It has a counter system. It has a lot of cool systems in it. It's a difficult game, but it's very rewarding. This is going to be near the top, but we have so many good top games here, and I don't know in terms of Treasure's best games. We already have two of Treasure's best games on here. We have Alien Soldier and Ikaruga, which are like the top of the heap. We don't have Gunstar Heroes in there, which will probably be even higher than both of those. But we don't have anything else by them yet. I don't think
have other games.
Yeah, I don't think it's better than Ikaruga, even though I love it. But anybody else can weigh in on that.
Well, my opinion of Sin and Punishment is that it has a mystique that I don't think is equaled by its quality. It is a good game, but I do wonder if, it regularly gets 9 out of 10s and 10 out of 10s from reviewers. And I do think at least part of that has been the fact that it was on a system that was not super well known for really solid action games. Of this type.
Weird because that type. But I was going to say the N64 was pretty much an FPS powerhouse. Like that was the system to own for that sort of shooty stuff.
They're also not the same kind of FPS that you sort of get now. They're not like that high octane sort of thing. They're very methodical games. But Like it is a game that the N64 was kind of lacking, and it was also quite a strong game that was not released outside of Japan. So I do feel like this game has a lot going for it because of its circumstances, but the actual game itself is good, but it's not like the most transcendental game. I was going to say, if I compare it to something like kind of close to similar time, like probably a few years after, but like something like Rez has like a very impressive visual style to go along with its sort of on-rails shootery. And on the same time, like, I think I would prefer Star Fox 64 over Sin and Punishment, because I think Star Fox 64 has a little bit more variety. It's a bit more friendly to the player, but still has some challenge in terms of expert mode. And it also has kind of a story that doesn't break your brain. It's not like the most phenomenal story ever, but has coherent characters.
Well, you bring up something interesting in that as far as on-rails shooters go, my favorite of all time is Star Fox 64. I think it's great. I absolutely love that game, and it's really hard to argue with that. I mean, you could say what you want about it, but it's a great game.
No, it's totally
what
fantastic.
It does.
I just wish we got Star Fox 2 though, also. But no, 64 is amazing.
I have to say that a quick follow-up to that is Panzer Dragoon Orta and Panzer Dragoon Zwei. They're both like Orta is a fantastic freaking game, and so is Rez. Rez is like a descendant of Panzer Dragoon.
No
so this game is right up there with all of them, but it's not as good as Star Fox. Star Fox is pretty much the example you go to for this type of game. Just kind of like, if we had to talk about great Galaga being a great like Space Invader style game, Galaga's it. This game is really, really good, but and it deserves a high ranking, but I'm not exactly sure where you guys want to put it.
Well, yeah, when you do put its story elements aside, it is just a fantastic, really high-octane experience, full of bosses, full of tricks and twists. You never feel like you're doing the same thing for very long. For the most part, it is very varied. Although one point I will dock with is that the second to last thing you have to do before fighting the giant Earth duplicate is that you have to go through this weird, very long, compared to the rest of the game, kind of platforming segment, which I feel does not fit the rest of the game very well. I mean,
I would agree.
The game's perspective, for the most part, is like, I want to say that this qualifies as a Cabal-like, that short genre of games that was inspired by the game Cabal, its sequel Blood Brothers, Wild Guns, probably what everyone knows best, that type of game. Behind the back...
Don't forget Pie-Ass.
Pie-Ass, yeah, by a Spanish company, Nix, I think it was. But yeah, it's a short-lived but very fun arcadey genre of games. I want to almost call them... behind the back single screen shooters. Although this game is a single screen, you keep running.
Just call them Cabal-like. Come on, you all know that.
I would say that this is the best Cabal-like. It's even better than Wild Guns, if you ask me. And Wild Guns is the top before
definitely.
that.
Except for its sequel star successor, I do think that Sin and Punishment is the ultimate, the apotheosis of the genre. That you could not get better than it, and thus, except for its sequel, I can't remember any other game like it that was released afterward. But that's why that one segment, like, if I do have to give it any minus points, that long platformy segment near the end is kind of a pain in the ass to control, and you don't really even fight any bosses throughout it. It really feels detached from the rest of the game, which it feels so unfitting to the point that I wonder if it was just kind of rushed, that part. Like, it's near the end, and, like, they already had a lot of things going for it, and then they just kind of fell apart near the end there. So I'm wondering if maybe the development might have been a little hurried. I don't know, because the rest of the game is...
Treasure being Treasure. Treasure sometimes will do that with their final stages, and they're do weird stuff with it.
To be fair, they were obviously running out of time for this game because they couldn't delay it. This game had to come out when it came out.
Yeah, because the N64 was dying. Yeah, definitely.
Treasure tends to do things at their own pace because they usually have a low budget, and all of their projects tend to be pet projects. So, like, they take their time with them. They usually have a publisher that might throw them a bone, like usually Sega or Nintendo.
Yeah, I think Nintendo was actually fairly heavily involved in the development of this game.
I think they published it, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that, but I'm relatively sure.
Well, Treasure's kind of interesting because they had or have a similar company structure to Valve in that they just sort of have just a pile of people who just kind of chip away at a project until it's done.
But they don't have any money. They don't have any money.
They don't have the money. So whereas Valve don't release anything because they just keep spending money on dicking around.
Yeah, Nintendo published this.
Treasure have no money, so they're just constantly scraping things together to hopefully release a project before they go bankrupt again.
Treasure needs to release their own PC distribution game client in order to stay afloat at this rate.
It wouldn't hurt if they re-release some of their games, especially some of their weirder ones like Silhouette Mirage.
Call it the treasure chest. Isn't that great?
That's excellent. It's perfect.
That's actually what the Gunstar Heroes... the Gunstar Heroes collection with Alien Soldier and Dynamite Headdy on it on PS2 was called the Treasure Box. Yeah.
We need to throw Sin and Punishment somewhere in our list.
Well,
it's going to be tricky.
Let's look at it from the perspective of other Treasure games, because if we look between Alien Soldier and Ikaruga, we have games that are similar to Treasure games. We have Ranger X, Contra Hardcores.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's in that territory. It's
Space Harrier, that sort of thing. Those sort of games.
I hope we get to place it above UN Squadron.
I actually think right between Ikaruga... I think actually in between Ikaruga and UN Squadron is where it should be. It's a great game. It's not better than Ikaruga, but it's right there. I don't think it's better than Ikaruga, but it's better than everything else below it.
I have a hard time arguing with that, to be honest.
I do think it is hard to push it much lower, because I do think once we get below that, you're starting to get to games that I don't think have the quality of polish and execution that this game has. So I do genuinely think that was actually where I was thinking of putting it. I just didn't want to straight up
my major issue with it is that Ikaruga is a little low for my taste, but I'm a huge Treasure fan and a big shmup fan, and Ikaruga is a little low. But
the main reason Ikaruga ended up so low, I think, is just shmups as a genre is so hard to place.
I think it mostly placed down there just due to the difficulty. I mean, maybe it's just us being scrubs, but it can be a hard game for most people to touch, even though it's one of the more accessible modern shmups there is. So it's kind of a weird paradox.
I would say it's the best modern shmup.
I don't think anyone would disagree with you. I don't think, and that's actually why it got
one of the highest rated shmups on there, isn't it? Like, there's nothing higher than it.
Galaga, but it's not going to rate higher than Galaga.
I am going to argue that Eschatos is better than Ikaruga, but that will be a discussion for another day.
And I would say that Eschatos is the only other shooter that's in the same breath of Ikaruga in the last 20 years.
Gotcha.
Xerxes, I'm going to want you to lock down our current Sin and Punishment.
You mean Snarbu?
No, I mean Xerxes.
Okay, well, if I have to be Xerxes, I'll put on the Xerxes pants. But anyway, so let the record show Sin and Punishment is between Ikaruga and UN Squadron, placing it at what? 21st place? I think it's 21st. Yeah. So 21st. It's right above UN Squadron. So
yep.
Let the record show. Forever hold your peace, etc., etc.
We love
good
stuff.
Good
stuff. It's a great spot. It's a great spot for it.